Revelation chapter 3, starting at verse 1. To the angel of the church in Sardis, write, These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up. Strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard, hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what time I come to you. Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So over the last 6 weeks or so, we've been looking at these letters that Jesus has written or communicated to the churches in Asia Minor through John. And as we've done this, what I've tried to do is try to show you how the words of Jesus to those particular churches are rooted in those churches' history, in the culture of those churches, and in the historical context and the religious context of those churches. So the images that Jesus uses or speaks to the churches, especially in those first couple of sentences, are not random. He's not just pulling images out of the thin air, but rather those images have deep meaning and significance to the people that live in those particular cities. Now, my hope has been that as I've shown you how these images and symbols that Jesus is using, how they relate to the people, my hope is that it has made you curious. That as you read, whether you're reading Revelation throughout the week or some other book of the Bible, or as we read Revelation together, that your mind is keen in on those images and beginning to ask questions. And if I could encourage one, this is an aside, this one's for free, you can take it home and do whatever you want with it, but for free, here it is. If I could encourage one practice when it comes to reading the Bible, it would be this: ask good questions. Read the Bible, yes. Believe what it says, yes. But also ask good questions. Because often by asking good questions, we get to a meaning that is under the surface that we might otherwise miss. We get to something that is deep, something that is profound, and we find out things about ourselves. So just ask good questions as you read the Bible. Maybe that happened for you this morning as we read through the words of Jesus to the church in Sardis. Maybe that little bit of practice of looking at these symbols and how they connect, you were just starting to wonder, I wonder what that means. We see the seven stars again. Maybe some of you remember way back to the first, but some of you are just like, I wonder what the reference to the seven stars is all about. And you remember, it is a reference to the sovereignty of Jesus, who holds the entire universe, all things in his hands, not Caesar. You remember the very first week we looked at those coins with Domitian's son sitting on the earth with the seven stars above him as if to say he is sovereign, he is Lord. And here again we see it, and Jesus is just reminding the people once again, no, I am. Maybe you keyed in on those words to Sardis that are different than the other ones. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are in fact dead. Now, on the surface, it seems very straightforward. Like, there's no symbolism there. We understand what that means. But maybe you're also wondering, like, hey, this is Revelation. We've been looking at symbols all the time. I wonder what this is a reference to. And if you've been wondering that, it's your lucky day, all right? Not only do we have coffee, but we're going to answer that question. What does it mean that Jesus says to the church in Sardis, you have a reputation of being alive, but you are in fact dead? Well, the physical location of Sardis is in fact very interesting. You want to put that first slide up in there. This is a distant shot of Sardis. Sardis is going to be down kind of here in the valley, but then up here, this is what is known as, look, I even got a pointer today. Like, we're breaking out all the stops. That is known as the Acropolis. And the Acropolis was the high point. The city was kind of built into the side of the Acropolis. And then at the top of the Acropolis, you can go to the next slide, they put in a fortress that kind of guarded over the whole city. Now again, as I said, down in the valley here is like where much of the city was. It's where the commerce happened. It's where the people lived. This right here in the foreground is a temple to Artemis. If you remember back to Ephesus, Ephesus had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world in the temple of Artemis. If there was an 8th wonder of the world, it might have been this one. The temple of Artemis in Sardis was absolutely massive. Now you may also see in the back we've got some vineyards and there's some olive groves. Sardis is a place that was rich with vineyards. I mean, they have vineyards all over. You go there today, there are still vineyards. And again, looming over the city was this Acropolis, this massive cliff-like mountain. I mean, it's kind of a mountain, kind of a hill, but you see what I'm saying? It's cliff-like, and they built a fortress into the Acropolis that guarded over the entire city. Go to the next slide here. Now, the interesting thing is, if this photo is taken from on top of the Acropolis, and it's looking across the valley. You can see the valley down right in there, and then it's got another mountain over here, and Sardis itself sat in between these 2 mountains. That one in the background there is known as the Necropolis. So here in the foreground, the Acropolis. In the background, the Necropolis. Okay? Now go to the next slide once. Now you can kind of see in this landscape here, again, Sardis is going to be right in the middle. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got the Acropolis, and over here on the left-hand side, we've got the Necropolis. And they looked extremely similar. Like, I spent a sad amount of time this week trying to make sure that I could differentiate between the 2 mountains, which one was which, and looking at pictures and trying to figure it out. And like, I'm still 90% sure that these pictures are accurate. They had little things at the bottom, but like, I spent a lot of time. Anyways, so we got the Acropolis here and the Necropolis there. Go to the next slide here. What do I want to say? Yeah, so the Acropolis, again, this is where the fortress was. You can see remains of the fortress up on top of that leftover cliff. There was in 17 AD, a massive earthquake that happened in Sardis, and this whole hillside kind of just collapsed. I believe, if you think back to the earthquake that happened in Haiti a few years back, that was a 7 on the Richter scale. This was a 10. I mean, it was just massive. That whole hillside, the whole area of Asia Minor felt it, but its epicenter was right near Sardis. Next slide. On top of the Acropolis, you can still see there are still remnants of the fortress, and for whatever reason, sheep. It's just interesting and fun. But looking over the whole thing. And again, it guarded over the city. It's where armies were. It's where the wealthy lived, up on the Acropolis. It's where the powerful lived, up on the Acropolis. This was a prominent, important feature of the city, and it made the city feel vibrant and alive. Next slide. And then you've got the Necropolis. And you can see there's some holes and dark spots in there. And those are tombs. Because the Necropolis was the hill of the dead. Necropolis literally means the dead city. And it was all tombs. Now, I don't know if this is what Jesus was actually getting at here, but it seems to have some relevance when he says, you have a reputation for being alive, but you are in fact dead. Paul, can you go back to that landscape photo, the panorama? You have a reputation of being alive, but you are in fact dead. And in Sardis, the Acropolis, the place where it seemed like everything was alive, there's wealth and there's power and there's influence, looks an awful lot like the same city that's across the way that's dead. Again, I don't know if that's what Jesus is getting at, but the geography alone of where Sardis is located seems to be relevant to these people. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Jesus comes out swinging at the city of Sardis. And he's challenging the story that Sardis tells about themselves. Not just the city, but probably the church as well. That they both were buying into this myth that we're doing good. Life is good. We've got wealth. We've got power. We've got this massive fortress here that is going to protect us. We are a healthy city. We are a vibrant city. We are doing good things in the world. And the church bought right into that same myth. We are a good church. We are a strong church. Look at these deeds that we have. We are vibrant. This is the story that the church is telling themselves, and Jesus comes to the church and says, you have that reputation. That's what you think. That's what others say about you. but I know the true story. And the true story is that you are dead. Yeah, these are scary words. And they're words that all of us ought to pay attention to, and words that we as a church ought to pay attention to. And really wrestle with this idea. Are we alive? Truly alive? Or is that the story that we are telling ourselves? What story is true about who we are? Now, I'm tapping into this idea of story just a little bit, and I'm doing it purposefully. And I don't know if that Jesus would have used that language, but it seems to make sense to me, because there is this like story that is happening when Jesus comes along and says, you have a reputation of being alive, and the people will be like, yes, we have a reputation of being alive, and then he turns the corner on him and is like, but you are in fact dead. It's like a plot twist. It's like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, right? Like Bruce Willis is alive, right? No, he's dead, right? Like that. Sorry if that was a spoiler, but that, like, right? The Sixth Sense. That's the whole thing. That's the plot, and that's what's happening right here. And again, I don't know if Jesus is pulling into the story thing or not, but I like to think that maybe he is, because Sardis is a place that loves stories. Stories were central to what life to the cultural life of Sardis. How many of you have ever heard of Aesop or Aesop's Fables? Yeah, a few of you, okay? For those of you who haven't, how many of you have heard the story of the tortoise and the hare? Yeah, all right? So the tortoise goes along. He's been making fun of the hare all the time. Oh, you're so slow. You know, how do you move through life like going at that kind of the pace of a turtle, just mocking the turtle relentlessly to the point where the tortoise says, fine, I will challenge you to a race. Hare's like, of course, I will take this bet and I will win. So the day comes and they go on the race, and the hare just bolts out from the starting line, gets this massive lead, decides that there is no way that the tortoise is ever going to beat him, and so he takes a nap, at which point the tortoise passes him by and wins the race. And the moral of the story is slow and steady wins the race. Or the story of the golden goose, or the goose that lays the golden eggs, right? A man and a wife, they have a goose. They find out as this goose comes to age, I'm not exactly sure when they found out and how they didn't know before, but they find out that their goose lays one golden egg every single day. And at first, that is enough. But then, that's not enough. And they become a little bit greedy, and they want more than just one golden egg per day. And they have the bright idea of, let's cut the goose open and get all the eggs out all at one time. And so they cut the goose open, only to find out that it is a goose just like every other goose, and it's not just stuffed full of eggs. And now they have no golden eggs. Yeah. Aesop. Fables. Those are his. Anyone got to guess where Aesop is from? Thyatira. No, he's from Sardis. Yes, he's from Sardis. Sardis is a city that loved stories, which brings us to another image that Jesus threw in his words to the church. Jesus says, wake up, for I'll come like a thief. Now, that's an image we've heard throughout the Bible. Jesus talks about that, I'll come like a thief in the night. We've seen it in other places. But in Sardis, it had unique meaning. And in order for us to pull out what this image meant or might have meant to the church in Sardis, I've got to tell a couple of different stories. One is a myth, and the other one, or other two really, are historical. So, here's what's true about Sardis. Sardis was an incredibly wealthy city. At one point, it's probably the wealthiest city in the world, just phenomenally wealthy. And it's because of the gold in the area of Sardis. But how the area became filled with gold is the legend. So the city sat along the Acropolis River. The Acropolis River had this like yellowish sand, and it was yellow because it was literally golden sand. Now, legend had it that in the region of Sardis, there was a king by the name of Midas. Midas was a king who had beautiful gardens, and one day some of his servants were walking through the gardens when they found a satyr, one of those guys who's got like the hooves of of a donkey and the upper body of a man, right? They find him passed out in the vineyard or in some bushes, right? So the peasants go up, they get the satire, they bring him before King Midas. And King Midas, shrewd enough to recognize that this satire is Silenus, the companion, the favored companion of the Greek god Dionysus. Dionysus, if you remember back a few weeks, he is the Greek god of wine. Yeah. So Midas shows compassion and hospitality to Silenus, takes Silenus back to Dionysus. Dionysus is so overcome with gratitude for Midas's hospitality towards his good friend that he grants Midas one wish. Midas wishes that whatever he would touch would turn to gold, right? The Midas Touch. And at first, this gift is just amazing. So he's having a blast with it. He goes around, touches a tree, turns to gold. Touches a spoon, turns to gold. Touches a table, turns to gold. Touches a statue, turns to gold. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. And he runs around for hours turning everything into gold. But doing all of that made him a little hungry. And so he decided that he needed to have a meal. And so he grabs an apple and turns to gold. And he goes to get something to drink and it turns to gold. And he goes to grab a drumstick or whatever, and it turns to gold. I imagine him putting his hands behind his back and trying to use his mouth, and it turns to gold. And suddenly he realizes that he's made a horrible mistake. So Midas goes back to Dionysus and says, is there any way that I can reverse this spell? Because this thing that I thought was a gift is in fact a curse. And Dionysus tells him, yes, all you have to do is go bathe in the river Pactolus. And so Midas goes to the river Pactolus, washes himself, and the gift is transferred to the river. And what the river touches turns to gold. Yeah, so Sardis becomes an extremely rich city. In 585 BC, a guy by the name of Croesus becomes the king over Sardis, and he figures out a way to basically dredge the river and collect all that gold sand and then melt it down and make coins and all these other things out of it, and he becomes extremely, extremely wealthy. In fact, there's a phrase, and it's more popular over in England, but rich as Croesus. It's where this comes from. This man becomes incredibly rich and has even founds the use of gold as currency type thing. I mean, just an incredible amount of gold. Now, as wealthy people do, Croesus now has a problem. He's got all this money. You've got to protect it. And so he builds the Acropolis at the top of that mountain in Sardis. And they built the fortress in such a way that they said that it was absolutely impregnable. Armies could not take it because there was no way up that mountain. It was so steep on all the sides. And then you need to get to the base of it. You had this massive fortress that just a few guys up at top could defend the whole thing. There was no way for armies to take it. And so that fortress made the people and the citizens of Sardis feel extremely secure. We are safe. We are taken care of. Nobody will ever put us in danger. But Croesus becomes, greedy, too ambitious, whatever, and he goes and does battle with a guy named Cyrus. Now, Cyrus is someone that we know from the Old Testament. Cyrus is the king of Persia. If you think back to the Old Testament, Israel is conquered and exiled by Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. He comes in, conquers Israel, and he exiles a bunch of the people, some of whom we know pretty well, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They all go off to Babylon, and the Israelites live in exile for a number of years. But then Persia comes in and conquers Babylon, and the king of Persia at that time is Cyrus. And when Cyrus becomes the king of over all the area, he allows the Israelites to return back to Jerusalem. We get this reference here at the very beginning of the book of Ezra, okay? So this is the guy that Croesus decides, I'm going to go do battle with Cyrus. Battle doesn't go as he thought it would. He retreats back to Sardis, back up into that fortress. Cyrus pursues him and sets up camp at the base of that fortress, but he can't take it. And so they just stay there for weeks and months on end. And as they're camping there, a Persian soldier by the name of Hieraides is sitting there, and he's looking up at the top of that fortress, and he sees that there's a soldier up there. And I found different reports on this. Some say that the soldier fell asleep. Some say that he just kind of looked over the edge. But in any case, his helmet falls off the edge of the fortress to the base. So Hyerides is watching that, sees the helmet fall, and then he sees the soldier turn around and walk away from the edge of the wall. And he just keeps watching. And then a couple minutes later, the soldier comes back and he's wearing the helmet. So Hyerides thinks to himself, he's like, there is a way down. That guy got down to the base and back up in just a couple of minutes after retrieving his helmet. So he goes and he tells his commander what he saw. His commander says, okay, let's see what we can do. Gives him some troops, and in the cover of night, they go to the base of the wall. They find a secret passageway, make their way to the top of the fortress, and they capture it. And Sardis falls. And now the Persians are in control. But they don't learn their lesson. 300 years later, the same thing happens. But this time, the Persians are in control of Sardis, and it is the Greeks who come down, and they are trying to capture the city. But again, they get to the base of the fortress, and they're like, how do we take this thing? There's no way up to the top. They can defend it super easily. Like, what are we going to do? And so they do the same thing. They camp out around the base of it, and they just are trying to figure it out and wait it out and see, does any opportunity show itself? And they're down at the base of the fortress, and there's a Greek soldier by the name of Lagaros. He notices that there are people up there who keep throwing carcasses over the wall, dead animals, donkeys, horses, whatever it is that die, animals that they've eaten. They throw them over the wall, and it creates this like dump area. And you can imagine with all those carcasses, buzzards and vultures begin circling around, and they feed on it. And Lagaros noticed, they feed, and then they go and they roost on the edge of the fortress right there. And they never get scared off. I bet that portion is unguarded. And so he gets some guys together, and in the cover of night, they go up to that portion of the wall, scale it. They go in there, and they find that he was right. That portion of the wall was not guarded. But even more than that, the soldiers felt so good about their fortress. They were so secure that no one was on guard. Everyone was sleeping. And those few Greek soldiers surround them all and get the Persians to surrender. Yeah. These stories are foundational to the history of Sardis, and all the citizens. The church would have known these stories well. And so when Jesus writes to the church in Sardis, wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what time I will come to you. He is reminding them of a story that they know well. That the moment you let your guard down, the moment you think that nothing can get you, the moment you think that you are completely secure and you're completely safe, that is the moment in which trouble is coming your way. That's the moment you get blindsided. When we tell ourselves the story, we're good, we're fine, we're okay, that's when we find out we are not, in fact, okay. I don't know about you, but that hits me as a real big word of warning. Living in the country we live in, living in a suburban area where life looks like it is okay, it is very easy to buy in the myth of it's all good. It's very easy to become complacent and to no longer be super intentional about how we're living our lives, to just fall into the routine, only to one day to be caught off guard. I mean, think about it like in terms of a marriage, right? You can tell yourself that your marriage is good, that you're both happy, that nothing could rock you or shake you or dislodge your trust in the other person. And you may believe it, and it may be true for a moment, but if you become complacent, if you begin to think that you don't have to work in it anymore, if you leave behind that intentionality, if you just let routine take over, you can find yourself surprised down the road. Or parenting. Our kids are good. Like, they're such good kids. We don't have to have that conversation about them. We don't have to check that often on their devices. We don't have to do these things. Like, we can just become complacent. Or in our jobs, I've got it down. I understand it. In our relationships, in our friends, like, you can see how this plays out in so many different areas of our life. And it can play out in our faith as well. I'm secure. I'm going to church on Sunday mornings most weeks. I'm showing up. I'm helping out. I'm volunteering. Somebody asked me the gospel. Yeah, I know what the gospel is. And we can tell ourselves that everything is okay only to become complacent in our faith. I'm good. Look at all that I do for Jesus. Jesus loves me. This I know. I'm in. And we lose all the intention and the vigor and the life. And we tell ourselves a story. But in fact, our faith is dead. This is a narrative that makes me uneasy. Makes me wonder, in what ways am I fooling myself? In what way am I telling myself a story that I think I know, but is not in fact true? It makes me think of two different stories that Jesus told in Matthew, in the book of Matthew. One of them is in Matthew chapter 7. And Jesus says there, "Not everyone who will say to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Even some who prophesy or some who cast out demons in my name," Jesus says. "Even some who do those things in my name, I will cast out of my presence." And then the other story is in Matthew 25, when Jesus tells us the parable of the sheep and the goats, right? The sheep and the goats are all kind of together, and when Jesus returns, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats, and the sheep are those who obeyed Jesus and loved Jesus, and the goats are those who did not. And Jesus says that the way he's going to separate them is he's going to look at what they actually did. So the sheep are those who fed Jesus when he was hungry, and gave Jesus water when he was thirsty, and showed hospitality when he was a stranger, and clothed him when he was naked, and visited him when he was a prisoner. And the goats will be those who failed to do those things. And what's scary, or what's interesting to know, it's interesting and scary, what to note in that story is that both the sheep and the goats didn't know that they were doing those things. Both the sheep and the goats have the same response to Jesus. "When did we see you?" And Jesus says to both of them, "To the sheep, whatever you did for the least of these, you also did for me. And to the goats, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me." I think these two stories, in these two stories, we see two different ways in which we find false security. Right? In the one story, we can tell ourselves that we're secure because we've done all of these things for Jesus. Right? We've done all these things. I prophesied in your name. I cast out demons in your name. I served in kids ministry in your name. I gave money in your name. I did all these things in your name. Look at my deeds. I'm good. I'm secure. And the other is a warning of the opposite mindset, where we say, well, I don't really have to do anything. My faith is just me and Jesus, and I don't have to do anything because I understand the plot points of the gospel. And so because of that, because I've made these intellectual assents to theological propositions, I'm good. Jesus really doesn't make any demands on our lives. It's all about forgiveness, but none of these other things matter. But what we see when we take the whole Bible into account is that faith without works is dead, but likewise, works are not alone enough. Neither one of those provide full security. But we can trick ourselves into thinking that they do. I believe. Good. Well, what's the fruit of your life? Is there anything else there? Well, I do all of these other things. That's great. But do you have an intimate relationship with Christ? True security comes from loving Jesus. And if you love Jesus, you will keep his commands. And if you keep his commands, you will do the things that he taught. And if you do the things that he taught, there will be fruit in your life. Or maybe a shorter way just to say that is to be faithful, or to be a Christian is to be faithful in our witness to Jesus as Lord in both word and in deed. And the reward for remaining vigilant in our witness is that Jesus will never blot out our names from the book of life. That is true security. We should not feel secure because everything is going well. We shouldn't feel secure because, well, it seems like God is blessing me. We shouldn't feel secure because, well, I show up to church or I do these other things. And we shouldn't feel secure because, well, I have all this knowledge and know these things. Security is found in walking with Jesus and holding fast to what we have received and what we heard. And what is it that we have received and heard? That Jesus is the one who holds the 7 stars. That he is sovereign over all that is, and that this one who is sovereign over all became a human, walked on the earth, showed us what God was like, and then made God's love tangible to us in the cross. And through the cross, we have the forgiveness of sins. We are united to the risen Jesus. We are adopted as daughters and sons. And we have the promise that one day we will share in the inheritance of Jesus when he makes all things new. Hold fast to that. Bear witness to it through your life, your whole life, in what you say and in what you do. Because it is that confession, it is that knowledge, and it is the transforming power of that on our lives and how we show up in the world. That is our security. That is our strong fortress. Nothing else other than who Jesus is and what Jesus has promised us. So be vigilant in it. Do not forget it. Hold fast. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Let's pray.